pollution problems. The Dutch government is in court defending its plans to cut flights at one of the world's busiest airports. Cash for Colombo. Sri Lanka gets a $3 billion international bailout, but will it be enough to end food and fuel shortages? We'll be live in the capital. Hello and welcome to World Business Report, whether you're watching in the UK or around the world. I'm Jonathan Josephs. The aviation industry is hugely important to the global economy, but it's also seen as one of the most polluting. It's responsible for about 2.5% of the carbon emissions that are warming the planet. That and noise pollution is why the Dutch government is trying to cut the number of flights at Amsterdam's Schiphol airport by more than 10%. And it's defending its plans in court today. But of course, airlines aren't happy. The likes of the local flag carrier KLM, America's Delta and EasyJet are behind the legal action that's being heard. They've invested heavily in what is the third busiest airport in the world for international passengers. Let's get more and speak to our correspondent, Anna Holligan, who I'm pleased to say joins us from The Hague. Anna, this is quite an interesting case being watched around the world because lots of governments are in a similar situation. But just tell us, what are the arguments both sides are laying out in court today?
Absolutely, and this could be seen as precedent setting around the world. But let's focus on the Netherlands, because here the government has pointed out residents' concerns, local residents, for their health, for the local environment, for the climate overall, and noise pollution is the really big issue here. So what they want to do, the government wants to do, is reduce the number of flight movements a year from 500,000 to 460,000 by November this year, and then reduce them by another 20,000 by 2024. Now, the airlines and various tour operators say this is all happening too fast. The government hasn't yet considered alternatives and has gone straight for the reduction. So what they say is that shrinkage should only be put on the table as the last option, and there are alternatives to reduce noise, nuisance and CO2 emissions. Bearing in mind, Schiphol Airport in Amsterdam is 100% state-owned. They have said they will go ahead with what the government decides, but can't rule out expansion in the future.
It comes at a time when Middle Eastern airports in particular are vying for that transatlantic business with Schiphol. You've got the likes of Dubai and Istanbul is also trying to get some of that traffic. There's intense competition. So how does the Dutch government go about balancing the commercial interests, the economy, versus the environmental concerns that are being played out in court?
It's really challenging. Schiphol accounts for about between 2 and 5% of Dutch GNP and provides between 120,000 and 360,000 jobs. So hugely important, third busiest airport in Europe, also the busiest in terms of actual aircraft movement. So really important. But then there are the environmental concerns, and the government has really ambitious targets on that front. So a framework has been laid out for the future of aviation here. By 2030, carbon emissions from aviation must be equal to 2005 levels. I'm reading this from a government printout. They have to be halved by 2050 compared to those 2005 levels. And by 2070, emissions from aviation must be reduced to zero. And at the moment, of course, we know there is no clear plan of action in terms of biofuels and all that kind of thing. So this really is being seen as something of a test case. What's decided here could really influence future legal decisions of this nature around the world. And we're expecting a decision from the court in Haarlem in 2 weeks' time.
So watch this space, 2 weeks' time for that verdict. Anna Holligan in The Hague for us. Thank you very much indeed. Now, China's top anti-graft watchdog has started an investigation into Zhao Weibo, the former chairman of the computer chip maker Tsinghua Unigroup. He's the latest high-profile business figure to now be ensnared in an industry-wide corruption dragnet. Our Asia business reporter Yao De Silva has more from Singapore.
It's the latest sign that Chinese authorities are not done with their cleanup of an industry of national strategic importance. The former chairman of computer chip maker Tsinghua Unigroup, Zhao Weibo, is accused of running the state-owned company as his private fiefdom. China's anti-corruption agency says he handed profitable businesses to his relatives and friends and purchased goods and services from his associates at prices significantly higher than the market. The case is now with prosecutors, who are expected to file charges. The company he once led is emblematic of what's been happening in China's semiconductor industry, which has received billions of dollars of government investment into projects that have stalled or failed. Over the last decade, the state-owned firm made a series of acquisitions and emerged as one of the country's leading chip makers. However, it racked up debt and ended up defaulting in 2020. It was restructured and placed under the control of two state-backed venture capital firms. Mr. Zhao is the latest leading figure in the Chinese semiconductor industry to fall from grace as the government looks to bolster domestic chip-making capabilities. Several chip industry executives were investigated for corruption last year. China has been trying to reduce its reliance on the West, just as the US and its allies have sought to cut its access to advanced semiconductor chips.
That was our Asia business reporter, Yao de Silva. Now, for the last decade, forest-dwelling people in the eastern Indian state of Chittagong have been strenuously opposing a new coal mining project by the Adani Group, which is one of India's biggest conglomerates. Despite their resistance, final clearances to the project were granted last year, which have triggered ongoing protests which have lasted for more than a year now. Nikhil Indamar has sent us this report from the epicenter of those protests.
Deep in the jungles of central India, these protests have raged on, non-stop for a year. Almost every day, the villagers here chant slogans. Go back, Adani, they say. We won't give you our land. The Adani Group operates the only coal mine here, and these forest dwellers accuse authorities of granting the company clearances for a new mine, despite continued resistance by forging their consent.
They
submitted the fake documents of the village council meeting showing that we had consented to land acquisition, but we had never agreed to give away our land.
I won't give my land, even if they take my life. I get my food from these jungles. What'll I do with the money?
Now, behind me there is the existing mine in the region, and right across is the village of Hariharpur, where people have been indefinitely protesting now for a year against giving up their village for a new mine. They say they haven't seen any development in their own village despite being in the shadows of one of the country's largest mines, and that's what makes them fearful of giving away their land for a new project.
Throughout our 2 days in these jungles, we've been subject to intimidation by a small section of youth in favor of the new mines. They follow us around on cars and bikes to prevent us from talking to the protesters.
The media shows only one side of the narrative. For there to be progress, there will have to be some destruction. We want development.
Refuting these allegations, the Adani Group said the Rajasthan Rajya Vidyut Utpadan Nigam, which owns these mines and for whom it is the mine operator and developer, had conducted the land acquisition, rehabilitation and resettlement of people in accordance with the stringent legal and regulatory frameworks. They also said due process was followed while getting the villagers' consent for their land. The Chhattisgarh government didn't respond to the BBC's queries. But resistance to Adani's quest to dig coal in these forests is mounting. For either side, a victory will be hard won. Nikhil Indamar, BBC News in Chhattisgarh, India.
Just time to have a quick look at the markets. If we think back to yesterday, Credit Suisse was the big story after that bailout deal being rescued by UBS. But bank stocks in Europe are slightly up today. Investors breathing a sigh of relief, all those reassurances from the policymakers and politicians that they have contained these problems in the financial system. That's all from World Business Report. There's plenty more on the website. Thanks very much for watching.